go ahead and get started. I'll let folks kind of come in, but welcome once again to the Big Texas Read. My name is Blake Kimsey. I'm the Executive Director of Writing Workshops Dallas. It has been a pleasure to do this reading series with David Samuel Levinson, who had the initial idea for a statewide reading series, who said, hey, let's partner with Writing Workshops Dallas and Gemini Inc., and let's do a monthly reading series. So now we're over 2 years into this, and even though things are opening up, it's still a real pleasure to get together online and see faces in these Zoom tiles every month to talk about our great books in this state. So every month we like to thank our sponsors. We got a grant from Humanities Texas, which has allowed us to sustain and support this reading series, support the authors who are on this series. The University of Texas Library System in San Antonio is great about posting and spreading the word. And then also Lone Star Literary. We love Lone Star Literary. They're a great website here in the state of Texas that just posts about everything literary from, I guess, border to border here in Texas. So if you don't know about Lone Star Literary, check them out. And also Gemini Inc. I have loved getting to know Alexandra Vandekamp, the executive director down in San Antonio. They have such great programming down there for the community. And so I want to hand it over to Alexandra to tell you a little bit about Gemini Inc., introduce our guests, and we'll be off to the races. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, that is one of the amazing things about this new virtual world we're all swimming through constantly these days. It does make like statewide collaborations a lot easier. So I probably would have never gotten to know Blake or Writing Workshops Dallas if it wasn't for the pandemic. Not that I ever would wish for that, but it was one silver lining, right? To be able to link literary arms more easily with other arts organizations that aren't in San Antonio. So thanks for the introduction. We're so psyched to have everyone here for Wondra Chang, who I could cheerlead forever because I think she's like such a wonderful example of the writer's life. And having this great debut novel come out with such acclaim, Kirkus review starred and everything, and it's just a fascinating read. All you have to do is go to her Amazon page. She has a plethora of reviews by just very grateful, very fascinated readers, and that's all to her credit. Gemini Inc., just briefly, we are San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. Believe it or not, we're in our 29th year. Our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And a part of that, we have a lot of workshops year round. Check us out, GeminiInc.org. Virtual classes, hybrid now, as well as in person. But we also just like to create literary events where readers find writers and really feed off of one another. And I think the Big Texas Read is a great example of that. So this is pretty much an author talk. Wondra will read briefly from her novel at the beginning. And then we have the wonderful Jay Brandon, an award-winning author in his own right, legal thrillers, all kinds of books, internationally known, being our guest moderator tonight. And we're also thrilled about that. So just to kind of introduce briefly our two main characters in the plot of TBTR tonight, I'm going to introduce first Jay, our guest moderator. I could be giving you a much fuller bio tonight for him than I am. He's a very prolific, interesting author. But just a little bit of a snapshot into his accomplishments. His 20th novel, which is called From the Grave, was published in January of 2020. And Booklist says of it, the pace is brisk, the writing elegant. His previous novel, Against the Law, published in 2018, Booklist called a fine, tense legal thriller with an offbeat plot. Jay's legal thriller, Running with the Dead, you gotta love these titles, right? Was called by Kirkus Reviews a brilliant entry in a series that just keeps getting better. His books have been published in more than a dozen foreign countries and have been optioned for movies by Steven Spielberg, among others. So he's a very interesting literary force in his own right. And I'm thrilled that he'll be conducting an author conversation with the one and only Wondra Chang. Wondra was born in South Korea and has lived in the United States since 1970. Her writing discipline began at age 10, writing 5 short stories a day. under the tutelage of a writing teacher. I'm going to want to ask you if you're still doing that, Wondra. She won first place in a province-wide in-person writing competition. She studied journalism at a very prestigious university in Seoul, Korea, called Ewha Women's University. And she currently lives in San Antonio with her husband, Bernard Roch. Just a little bit about Sonju, the novel we're featuring tonight. It's Wondra's debut novel, and it has been highly lauded by readers while receiving a starred review and special mentions by Kirkus Reviews. It was labeled by Kirkus as one of the best books of 2021. So suffice it to say, this book has made no small literary splash since coming out. I'm just going to read one quote from one of the many kind of inspired readers that are leaving reviews on Wondra's Amazon page. So this is just one reader. Wondra Chang has written a historical novel full of subtle poetic prose, sensory details, and psychological insights. The book gives the reader a rare window into the war-torn history and culture of Korea, told from the perspective of an intelligent woman who craves a chance at equality and modernity. What an accomplished first novel from an author who is a born storyteller. Looking forward to the next book. And I think that's a great phrase. Wondra is a born storyteller. I mean, this is a page turner, but it's also rich in detail, character development. The world is really fully realized. And it's basically the story of a one woman's attempt to kind of find true agency and independence in her life. And it mirrors this very tumultuous time in Korean history. Right after being, so I'm not going to go on and on because I think Wondra can do that better, but I love the parallel, the political and the personal are very interestingly meshed in this book, and it's a very vivid read. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Jay Brandon, our featured moderator for the night, and we look forward to the conversation that will unfold.
Well, good evening, Wondra. Would you like to begin by reading from the opening of the novel?
Say it again.
Would you like to begin by reading from the opening?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm having some hearing problems. Okay, I'm going to start with chapter 1, the beginning of the book. So this is after the World War II ended. Seoul, 1946. At the sight of the two tall Americans in military uniforms walking ahead of her toward the Korean Central Administration building, Sonju's heart beat a little faster. A month after America dropped atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, one of her Japanese classmates in high school came to her house to say goodbye, and they had cried together. That was well over a year ago. Sonju took another glance at the broad backs of the Americans before she turned left to cross the cobblestone boulevard. She tightened her grip on the thinking stone in her gloved hand and hurried, swallowing the dry November air that scraped her throat, puffing white smoke with each breath. The 8th house from the corner, a newly whitewashed traditional house, Minsu said, had told her. After a 4th knock, the varnished wooden gate opened halfway and a young maid's cocked head appeared. I'm your mistress's friend, Sonju said. The maid opened the gate to let her in, and Sonju marched into the courtyard and on toward the living quarters. The maid dashed by Sonju, craned her neck toward the living room, and announced in an urgent tone, "You have a visitor, ma'am." Misu opened the frosted glass door, and her face lit up like the first flowering spring. "Ah, it's you." She hooked her arm into Sonju's and walked toward the room, her long satin dress whispering with each step she took. In Misu's marriage room, everything was new and shiny. Freshly varnished paper floor, a double wardrobe against one wall, next to it neatly stacked floor pillows, and on another wall, 3 works of blue and white porcelain pottery displayed on a low credenza. One of them cradled Misu's thinking stone like a prized jewel. Sonju smiled and touched the stone in her pocket. Kongu, Misu, and Sonju each had picked a small flat stone at a church garden when they were still in elementary school and called them thinking stones. Sonju took off her coat and gloves. As she lowered herself to a floor pillow, she glanced at the embroidered flowers on Misu's pink skirt, then briefly dropped her gaze to her own gray wool dundle skirt. You are glowing, Misu. Marriage suits you well. Misu's small cherry lips turned up and her thin eyes twinkled. She quit smiling and studied Sonju's face. Something's wrong, tell me. After a slow sip of hot roasted barley tea, Sonju said, this morning, my mother announced that my sister is promised in marriage. The wedding is in April. She said her daughters will not marry out of order. She ran her fingers over the pillows piping until it turned the corner. I'm not ready yet. When will you be ready? You are almost 20. You are keeping track of my years too? Sonju winced inwardly at her own shrill voice, and this time said in a softer tone, sorry. I want to marry Kongu. Then she asked, what do I do? Mrs. Brows jumped up. Marry Kongu? She sighed as if weary and said, we should have stopped seeing him when we started middle school. There is a good reason why boys and girls are separated at that age. Sonju wanted to say something just as condescending, but said, but we didn't. The 3 of us were lifelong friendship on the thinking stones. I told you I wasn't going to quit my friendship with Kongu just because I reached the age of 12. We were lucky we didn't get caught with him. But marriage? Miss shook her head. Surely you have better sense. Better sense? Sonja took a long breath and said to herself, patience, patience. I also told you if you had been born into a family like his, I would still be your best friend. Sonju watched Misu chew on her lower lip for a while and said, Misu, it's my life to live, not my mother's, not anyone else's. The choice should be mine. Unlike our parents, we received a modern education, not that state Confucian philosophy. For years, we talked about living in modern life. You and Kongu did. It was a mistake to come. Crushed, Sonja tried again. Kongu and I understand each other. There are things we want to do. We'll be equal partners in marriage, having equal voice. How can I give him up? Misu's head moved side to side. Your parents will never approve. Sonju had resisted her mother's push for marriage for almost 2 years already. 1 more year is all I need, she said. By that time, Kongu will have graduated and secured employment. We can get married then, even if I have to elope. It wasn't as though she hadn't thought about leaving home for a year. But where would she go? How would she support herself? Misu said, you can't elope. What would that do to your family? Sonju wanted to argue what not marrying Kongu would do to her, but said, I came here to see if you can help me come up with an idea to dissuade my mother. She rose to leave. Sonju had no choice now but plead with her mother. Shall I continue?
No, let's stop right there for the
Okay.
topic. By my calculations, Sonju is considerably older than you are. So at the beginning of that story, which is in 1946, you're writing about a time that you couldn't have any personal memory of. So why did you choose to set the story in that time and that place? And how did you choose this character?
Well, actually, it would have been closer to my mother's generation, the Sonju, the character. You know, as I was growing up, first, because of the family situation, I lived in my clan village for 2 years. And during that time, I listened to a lot of stories. It's a farming town, so after farming is done, women got together eating snacks or drinking tea, and they gossiped. They gossiped about mother-in-laws and what they went through, what they have gone through during the war and such. So I learned a lot about what the life was like. And when I look at my mother's generation, what's striking is that they went through so much change in such a short time. So it was an interesting period, you know, her lifespan. So she was born, this Sonju, the protagonist, was born during the Japanese occupation and experienced oppression by the Japanese. And then it was liberated at the end of World War II. And then Americans administered for 3 years, just like we did in Iraq in recent times. And then after that, there was a nationwide election. Oh, I skipped something. At the end of World War II, Korea was divided into two, North and South Korea, at the 38th parallel line. And North is, you know, because Russians and Americans won the World War II. Russia had a lot of influence on North Korea. And so after it was separated, North became communist Korea and South became capitalist Korea. So the intention of those two superpowers, Russia and America, was not to divide the country permanently, but it turned out that way. So South Korea had the election and we became a republic.
So let me pause you for a minute there. So the answer is you chose this time period because it was a very eventful time period and things were changing. Is that right?
Right, things were changing. And even after that, after the republic, it was a corrupt government, so there was a revolution. And before that, there was Korean War in 1950, North Korea attacked. And so people went through that. Sonju's generation, people of her generation. And then there was a revolution in 1960, and there was a military coup in 1961. So she went through so much, and time was changing. The foreign influence started coming in very fast, especially American. So I thought that period was very interesting, that I knew pretty well, and I didn't really have to do a lot of research into that.
Okay, because you had the family stories and that sort of thing. That was your research. I learned a lot about Korean history from Sonju, the novel, not the character. For example, I didn't know until I read this novel that Japan occupied Korea from 1915 until the end of World War II. So Sonju grew up in that life, and that's all she knew, was living under the Japanese occupation. So the conflict in this story, I've often told writing students when I teach writing, if you can create a conflict on the first page that will take the length of a novel to work out, that's how you write a novel. And you've certainly done that here. Sonju wants to marry one man, and her family says she can't. They want her to marry a stranger, which is the tradition. So you really did a great job of setting up that conflict in the early pages. Was that conscious? Did you consciously start with that conflict?
Yes, the story, extends over 2 decades. So I had to really move fast because I didn't want to skip a big block of time either during her life. So I got there fast, and I also wanted to pull the readers in. And so that's what I did. That's how that came to be the first chapter.
That's great. I don't know if that was instinctive or if you had read about that, but that was a great way to start. So would you describe your writing routine? Did you write every day? Did you have an outline? Did you just launch out into this story?
Before I start writing, I do a lot of thinking. I have an idea and I do a lot of thinking. And in my head, I'm not the person who writes down and outlines and such. That happens in my head. So I usually have a good idea how to begin, how the middle is going to be, what happens in between, and how I want it to end. So once I have a pretty good idea, and I think about a title, because that kind of orients me, right? If I have certain title, then I'm going to stick with it. So then I sit in front of the computer. I don't do writing at all on paper. So I start writing. And at first, I might have a lot of details, but I try to stick with the basic structure of how it goes, and then later add the details. And then there's a lot of rewriting, revisions, and things like that. So I don't have a set time. I'm more like a binge drinker, sort of. Sometimes when I have a big length of time to write, I sit, and sometimes I stay up until 3 or 4 o'clock. And I don't know if it's like that for other writers, but sometimes the words just come, sentences come, and I don't want to stop. So as long as that thread of thinking continues, I just stay with it if I can. And then some days I don't write at all.
Let me tell you, it's not like that for all writers that you write until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You sort of started to answer this question, but did you write first draft straight through and then go back and revise and add details, or did you do that as you went along?
Well, I was learning how to write. When I wrote a lot when I was a child, when I was 10 years old. And then I stopped because in Korea, the preparation for entrance exam gets really, really intense. And my middle school was coming up, and then high school, and then college. So I quit writing altogether. I always thought I would write, but then I came to America, and I cannot, I thought I couldn't possibly write in English because my English wasn't all that great, right? To write a novel, it takes a lot of skill, verbal skills. So anyway, I just waited, but I thought about it. And what I did was at the time when I started, it was about 2006, actually. And not many people knew a lot about Korea, not like nowadays. And I wanted to introduce Korea, basically. So that was always on my mind, the culture, its own unique culture and political background. And I ended up writing about 150,000 words and followed her for 50 years instead of 23 years. And I decided it's not necessary to carry forward that long. And I even killed off one character because there were just so many characters to keep track of. And I thought about, Americans reading this, they have to get used to all different ways of calling each other, right? First sister, second sister, and also how to read Korean names. So I had to think hard about how Americans can actually say those names. And there are a lot of things to consider. So it's easier for American audience to read and not get bogged down and kind of stop the thinking, the flow of thinking. So I cut out one character because I figured it will be hard for the readers to keep track of, and it wasn't necessary. So that's how it came to be.
When you say you killed off a character, writers use expressions that maybe normal people don't use. When you say you killed off a character, do you mean in the course of the book? Because of course there's a war, you had a lot of opportunities to literally kill characters, or do you mean you just excised that character from the book, you just took that character out?
Well, I decided to, somebody said there are a lot of characters here. So I thought about who do I get rid of, right? So I had to think hard, and I felt like, okay, I can eliminate that character and maybe use some of that traits, combine it with somebody else. So that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah, I learned a lot about Korean history. Like I said, every once in a while, you'll have a couple of paragraphs where you just say, this act was passed there. And the scenes of the Korean War are very vivid. That how suddenly it seemed to break out and how confused everyone was. And it was one country essentially that went to war with itself and changed everything, so that there were instances where people were running away, and if you fell down, you ended up being on the other side. Where did you get that information? Did you get that from family stories, or did you read about that?
Yeah, I heard, are you talking about like Korean soldiers being, okay. I heard about that. I heard about a person who actually had to fight for North Korean side when Korean War broke. The thing is, the capital city of Korea is Seoul, which is only like 30 miles away from the DMZ line, 38 parallel, where it divides north and south. So the Korean Sea North Korean Sea was a surprise attack on Sunday, June 25th, Sunday. President Truman was at his home, not in the White House, when the war happened. And they started early in the morning on the June 25th, 1950. So being Sunday, a lot of soldiers were on vacation off the post. So it really was a vulnerable time. So anyway, they attacked. And then since then, it occupied Seoul 4 times. So what I would like the Americans understand, the readers understand, is Korean War started on June 25th of 1950. They fought ferociously. Later, Allied forces came and they fought ferociously. But for civilians, most of the fighting after the first initial fight, it was fought near the line, near the 38th parallel. So a lot of the times the life just went on.
Let's talk about the story a little bit and about Sonju. She goes through a lot of changes. You said the story covers about 20-something years, which seems accurate, but she is married into a family where the marriage is arranged and she doesn't know her husband at all.
Right.
But then that introduces a whole other part of the novel where she gets to know that family, and not only that family, but that village, and that completely different way of life for her, because she's from Seoul, the big metropolitan city, and
right.
she's up in this village. How much, without spoilers, and I'll stop you if you're going to give any, would you like to describe the story a little bit of Sonju and how she develops?
At the beginning, she has never been to the small countries. She lived in Seoul. She was raised there. And she fully expected to get married and live there for the rest of her life in Seoul. So she was forced to marry into this farming village. And she finds it very unsatisfactory because there are no stores, there's nothing, just farmland. Eventually, through the interactions with the family and learning of the family history, she develops affection for the in-laws. And then along with that, she also has this warm feelings toward the villagers and the village. So I wanted to show her change in her attitude toward the town that she married into. And later on, when she thought she had a chance to move to a big city, she sort of prefers not to. So does that answer your question?
That answers my question plenty. This was a first novel. How did you find a publisher?
Well, my publisher is here. So anyway, Gemini Inc. used to have writers conference. Was that what it was called? Writers conference once a year. It was in July. And so I attended that. And instead of attending the classes, I decided to volunteer downstairs. It was at a hotel near the river. So anyway, I looked around all the booths that's set up downstairs, and I came upon this. There were a lot of university presses there, and I came upon my publisher, and we talked a little bit, and I told her about what I'm writing, and I told her I might be interested in sending my manuscript when it's done, and she said okay. And then I don't know how much we kept in touch, but in 2020, we had AWP conference happening in San Antonio. That's when the COVID started too. So about half the people didn't show up. But my publisher was there, and when she tried to set it up, I became her contact in San Antonio because she lives in Dallas area, north of Dallas. So I had a chance to get to know her better, and I was really impressed with the way she looked at her authors. She calls them my authors, and I thought that was such a nice, warm attitude toward the authors. So anyway, so when it was done, when I thought it was ready, I sent an email, said, okay, I'm ready to send it, here it is. So I sent it to her because I got to know her personally. So I didn't go through query letters or anything like that. I just sent it to her, and she said, she sent an email saying, well, there are other manuscripts before yours that I have to read. So I thought, okay. And 2 days later, I think it was 2 days later or the next day, she said, the title was, I read it straight through. So she liked it, and she said, do you want to write a contract? So that's how it happened. Very unusual.
It is very unusual.
Yes.
Once you got a publisher and an editor involved, did the novel change? Did your editor or publisher have much input into that?
Not that much. My publisher said it was a very clean manuscript, and there wasn't that much to change. And I was ready to send it to Purpose Review for reviews written. And my publisher said, wait a little longer. I want you to read this reviewer. At that time, what we were doing was finding reviewers, right? She got some of her contacts, and I had my contacts to have them write some blurbs about me. So she wanted me to read this person's blurb, and he wrote something else, and he kind of, instead of sending it, she kind of heard and hummed, and he said, I want you to understand that he really likes your novel. You should see what he wrote to other authors. So I said, Kim, it's okay, I can handle it, send it to me. So she sent it to me, and it was by Clay Reynolds. I think a lot of you know Clay Reynolds. And he wrote a blurb, and then at the bottom, voluntarily, he critiqued the whole entire novel. He started with, this is not a novel. And then he wrote that the author would not need much to change this. So he said he liked it a lot. He wanted to work with me. That was the email he sent to my publisher. So that's what I got. So I contacted him and I said, I would like to work with you. I like people who criticize real directly. So we worked together, and there were little things to tweak. There were some holes because as a writer, we assume that readers know things just because we know. And so there were some holes that I had to plug in. So there were not really a lot of changes. So I'm indebted to him.
One thing I noticed about Sonju is that it's primarily a book about women. There are a lot of women's relationships. They start out in all different kinds of ways. Some of them start out antagonistic. Some of them start out friendly from the beginning, but they nearly all evolve and change. I found that really interesting. And I wanted to know, did you focus on women because one of the themes of the book is the traditional separation of men and women in that early time period. At the end of the evening, the men would go to the men's house, the women would go to the women's house.
Right.
Did that dictate that it was a women's story, or did you choose to do that, or is that just how the story went?
Well, the protagonist is a woman, and it's about her journey of trying to be more independent and having equal rights and so forth. So it was important for me to tell women's story, right? What situation they were in, because of the acceptance of Confucianism during the Joseon dynasty. That's about 500-year dynasty right before Japan occupied in 1910. So women were at the bottom of the totem pole in the social structure. And so even when the husband refers to the wife, he will call her interior person. And then the husband is called the exterior person. What that means is that women are basically minding just household matters, little matters. And men went out, met other people and made big decisions. So that's how it was. So since this person, I wanted to have feminist bent in this novel. So it was important to tell stories about all different women. The women in the story kind of share similar experience, the women who were discarded by the society and the family. So that's what I wanted to do.
There is a wide range of women characters. I'm thinking of one village woman that you nicknamed Buddha Ears.
Yes.
She was a fascinating character. I'm going to ask you in a minute if you want to read another passage, because I know you have one in mind that shows the women's reactions to each other. But I want to read a couple of your descriptions. I think you were really good at quick descriptions, and I want to ask you about that. Here's one of them. Here are two from a chapter that begins on page 167. Quote, a full-faced young woman with a glowing complexion opened the gate, which I thought was just a great quick description. And then presently a long-faced, wiry young woman in a thick cotton shirt and muted gray Montpe work pants entered the living room, bowed to Sonju, turned around and left the room. Now, in writing characters, I've found you can't describe the character well enough that the reader will picture what you're seeing in your head. But I thought your quick descriptions of characters were really good. They brought them to life for me. And I wanted to know, was that a conscious choice to keep the descriptions brief, knowing you really couldn't elaborate enough that people would see what you were seeing, or is that just how it turned out?
Well, I am by nature a minimalist. I don't want to have a really long, elaborate description if I can do it in short sentences. So that's what I strive for, always, always. So I cut out a lot of words. I just write whatever comes up, and later I cut out a lot of words, even sentences. So yeah, that's what I try to do.
All right. Well, it was very effective. Do you have another passage that you want to read?
I want to show how the women, women in Seoul might have been a little different because they were exposed to a lot of more advanced, the new culture coming from the West and Japan. But in villages, they were pretty stuck in the old ways. So this is the scene I would like to read, where Sonju and her sister-in-law, who has been in the family longer, husband's family longer, they're discussing, they all live together in the same household with the mother-in-law, with the parents-in-law. So this is the scene where the second sister-in-law says, oh, I forgot to tell you, after father-in-law finishes his breakfast, we are going to a clan home to make yo mattress. It's a floor mattress, yo mattress. Sonju watched the two maids leave the kitchen and was relieved that gossip came to an end. A yo for whom? Sonju asked, cutting the kimchi into bite sizes. One of the clan daughters is getting married in a month, and it's a tradition for the clan women to make the nuptial yo for clan daughters. On the way to the yo making, second sister said, the hostess's husband has a habit of leaving home for days. Everyone knows he has another woman somewhere. He always has a woman somewhere. He's gone again, so we can talk freely in his house without men around. By the time Sonju and second sister arrived at the yo making, the clan women were spreading cotton in layers on a large white muslin cloth. Big house lady slid sideways on her hips to make room for Sonju. Isn't second house lady coming? One of the women asked second sister, who situated herself between two women and was presently arranging her cap-length underskirt to cover her legs. Sonju noticed that second sister was always polite and obedient and smiling in the presence of elders, even at the house. The elders often praised her for those qualities. A woman next to her answered instead, why should she? Unlike big house lady here, she has not one but two daughters-in-law to take her place. Big house lady smiled and didn't make any comments. The cotton bedding was thick. The women covered it with muslin cloth and started stitching the edge. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing. Cocking her head toward the hostess, a woman with a mole on her chin asked the hostess, where is your husband this time? I don't know, but I can tell you he is having fun. A woman with tan skin smirked, is he any good? Sonju's face turned hot. The women were so bold. I don't know, the hostess said, her voice flat and detached. It's been such a long time. The women must think he is good. Some people saw him in the cities carrying on with young ones. The hostess sighed and said, I don't grieve over that anymore. He will always have chased women. Sonju vowed that this would not be her fate, and that she would not tolerate such behavior in her husband. As it was, she was finding it hard to see her father-in-law the same way as before, even though her mother-in-law seemed fine after getting even with her husband. A woman with Unusually large drooping ears like Buddha's said, at least your husband leaves you alone. Mine complains about my looks, covers my face with my skirt, and does it like chicken stew, quickly. Everyone laughed. Sonju could tell this wasn't the first time they had heard this. It was so sad. It was so sad and infuriating that she could almost cry. The one with the mole expelled a loud sigh before she asked no one in particular, do you ever wonder what we live for? Sonju wouldn't have known how to answer if that questions had been directed at her. She would raise children, guide them, but what else? She had once thought she would do good for the country, but was it possible now? She heard the hostess snap at the woman. Why do you ask such a question? That kind of question gets you nothing but trouble. You know the answer. You are born, serve men folk, get married, serve your husband's family, raise children, marry them all, then become a mother-in-law with a farm hand so your daughter-in-law learns her place and won't treat you badly in your old age. That's what we live for. No one argued. They placed the muslin-covered bedding on the white cotton fabric, laid a satin cover on top, and began stitching them together, leaving a crisp white border around the bright pink satin. The woman with thin skin turned to Sonju. You're from Seoul. Do all women live the way we do? All eyes were on Sonju. She looked at each woman briefly. She's a woman before she spoke. There are women who go to university and work outside the home. Not all women live the way you describe. So women nodded, all quiet again, though yours finished. Big house lady folded into third and laid it in the center of the room. This is a gift of hope and dreams from the clan women to the bride-to-be. Everyone stared at it. My dreams have long ago ceased, even in my imagination, Buddha ears said after a sigh. On the way home, Sonju asked second sister, why was Big House Lady snubbed? Because she has 2 sons, but neither lives here with their parents. They rarely visit. Our mother-in-law won't let that happen. They walked home without further words, each in our own thoughts about their mother-in-law. Let me stop there.
Yes, the social, the society, the social strata are really interesting in this book because again, she comes from the big city and that's one social strata, and there are various ones within the village and within the family that I've found really interesting. Now that the book has been published, what kind of reactions have you been getting to it? Have you done anything with book clubs, for example, other than this one?
Well, I get invited a lot, especially the local book clubs. So I make a point of being there if I can get there. And I also have done a lot on Zoom. And people, usually people ask about the same questions. And what they say is they learned a lot about Korean culture. They thought they knew, but they learned a lot. And, you know, it goes deeper. I don't know if readers can get the feel of how religion affected, because before Joseon dynasty 500 years ago, it was another Korea dynasty, and Buddhism was the national religion. During that time, women could divorce, women could own property, and I don't think they lost the children to the husbands in every case if there was a divorce under Confucian society. So the religion really affects the choices of women make, and choices a lot of people make, but especially women, because they were oppressed ones. So I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but yeah, there is, even though it was liberated at the end of World War II, even when I was growing up, there were the family, where the family came from is important, whether, the class the family belongs to, even though that was no longer, we didn't have kingdom and so forth, but they still had a understood class of aristocrats or upper level people that carried over from the kingdom. And the merchants were about the lowest class in those societies still. And I think that's how it was in many, many countries in the world. Because most of the people before the industrial age, their wealth came from the land, from farming. And that was the case in Korea as well. So she married down because she is from, her family owned a lot of land that king granted some generations ago. And she married into a farming family who owned a lot of farm, but it was still lower class.
Let me just tell readers that there are distinct sections of this book. Sonju's life goes through various phases, and I found all of them really interesting. Let me ask you, this book came out a year ago. Are you working on another book?
Yes. I have finished the draft. It's going to be a short book because this started with 150,000 and cut it down to a little less than 90,000. But keeping track of 23 years was very daunting to me, because if I wanted to switch the scenes in the story, then I had to go all the way back and make sure the time and season and everything matched. And so there was a lot of work that went in there because I keep up with the time with letters and so forth. So I decided it's going to be short from now on. It's not necessary to be long to be a good novel. And so I'm going to stay at about 50,000 words. I am at about 41,000, but it's basically done. So I probably will send out to my first beta reader soon to see what holes I need to cover.
Okay. Now, you moved to America in 1970. Is your new story set in America, or are you still writing about Korea?
It's still about Korea, but a different period. It happens in 1981, and it happens over 4 days. So it's very intense. It's deeply character driven. Sonju is it's both plot and character. It has a nice curve of the story, the way it develops. And since it's 4 days, over 4 days, it's pretty intense. So it's a challenge because I have to struggle with my language still, because this is my second language and I'm not all that competent with the words available to me. I know it's out there, but yeah, so it's a struggle.
Let me say you're very proficient in your second language. I have one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Alexandra to open up to the audience. You started out writing a lot of short stories in Korean. That story of when you were a child writing 5 short stories a day. Some writers, I'm one of them, once you start writing novels, you really don't get that many ideas for short stories anymore. But of course, there's also a lot of well-known writers who are known for both their novels and their short stories. Do you ever still write a short story anymore?
I think when I think about a story, I see it as a novel. It can be a small novel, but I still see it as a novel. I don't know if I will be dedicated to short story writing, to be honest. When I was a child, I was given a task instead of doing regular homework. My homework was to write 5 short stories a day, and I had to come up with a story and the title and so forth. And every day after school, my writing teacher critiqued. So I think that what that helped is because I had to imagine and come up with a story, right? Every 5 stories a day. So I think it helped me a lot, that practice, even though it was such a long time ago, to come up with, because when I sit in front of the computer, the story comes to me a lot of times. It just comes. So, and I thought about the same thing, if I will ever write a short story, because there are a lot of competitions and such. But I think in terms of novels every time. So I think I'm a novelist.
That's the case with me too. It's very satisfying to write a short story, but now every time, once you've started writing novels, every time you get an idea, you can see how you could expand it into a novel. Ray Bradbury once wrote that he started every day by writing a new short story, whether he was writing a novel or not. But some of us, and you're one of them, I think, are just born novelists. So,
I think you have a better chance of putting a lot of creative ideas in one book. You know what I mean? As a novel, because you got to follow the story and so forth. That's what I think. I could be wrong.
well, you know what you want. Thank you for this conversation, Wondra.
Thank you, Jay, for moderating.
No, those were great questions, Jay. And it's just very interesting to hear about your whole writing process, Wondra. So you're trying to do a shorter second novel.
Yes.
That's interesting.
About 41,000. And I think I can make it close to 50,000 because I didn't add a lot of details, but I'm going to go ahead and send it to a beta reader and see what holes there are. I know something, I feel like something is missing. I like the ending. So I need to get somebody else's opinion, a reader's opinion.
So how do you mind me asking, like, how do you find your beta readers?
Well, I have friends who love to read, and I would like to, some of them, I don't necessarily like to find a writer to do the beta reading. So I just find them among friends.
Okay,
You know,
cool. Sure.
yeah, would you read? And I have done that, and she gave me, and she promised me this time too. She was my first beta reader, and she gave me like 8-page critique on it. And I like that. You know, I want people not worry about hurting my feelings. I can handle it. So I just want somebody to give me a very brutal, honest critique. That's why I like Clay Reynolds.
Right, that's a great story about Clay, that he wrote a blurb and then he was inspired to actually go even deeper and give you that critique.
Yeah, and then you know, he said it really needs line editing. So I was thinking, well, my poetry is supposed to provide line editing. So I thought it wouldn't hurt to get 2 people's opinions, right? So I said, well, thank you, but I will definitely work with you for the next novel that I'm going to write. And so that was that. And then, like about a week later, he said, well, I went ahead and line edited anyway. Here it is. So that's, and he knew a lot about Korea. So after he passed away in April, I went to his memorial reception. It's up in Dallas, and I said, you know, I told his son, he knew a lot about Korea. And said, oh, he knows a lot about a lot of things. And I said, I'm writing a short novel. And he said, oh, I think he would have liked it longer. So, but yeah, so I saw him as my mentor because we worked I have never met him in person, but we worked closely through the course of improving my writing, my novel. Yeah.
No, it's a great story of like a literary friendship that happened, you know, over your book. Yeah. So it's just kind of and getting that mentorship, you know, from him. so I want to open this up because we would love to hear. It's 8 o'clock, so like 10 minutes or so of an audience Q&A. If you posted any question in the chat, we can read that question in the chat, or we can unmute you. Blake's our commanding commander of the Zoom board, so to speak.
Okay.
So he can easily unmute anyone who would like to maybe directly talk to Wondra. So let me just kind of. Right, now that's a great comment, Reggie. So you got some nice comments that he's already thinking ahead of your third novel, Wondra. And he's hoping it's set in the US.
I have a third novel.
His wish for you is that it's set in the US and it offers us a focus or exploration into aspects of American experience from the perspective of someone like a Sonju or Wondra like character. Interesting idea, Reggie. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I guess, would anyone like to unmute and ask our amazing author a question? We'd happily unmute you and let you talk to Wondra directly.
Yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, unmute yourself. We will
questions?
hand that control over to you. Yeah.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for a lovely evening, and congratulations on a wonderful novel. So you said for so many years you weren't writing. What inspired you? I mean, what triggered you to say it's time? And you sat down and wrote.
Well, I have lived in the United States for a long time, and I was a psychotherapist. And being a psychotherapist, you get to learn a lot of words because we use a lot of medical words, a lot of Latin words, and a lot of words spring from that. So, and then I had to write a lot of therapy notes too. So, every step is a process of learning. I'm still learning. I have some issues about, I still have some tremendous difficulties with American language, like articles and prepositions and tenses, because we don't have that in our, in Korean language. So it's a struggle every time I sit down and write. So at some point, I'll tell you, I'll be really honest here. I was going through a divorce. This is a personal story. And I was so darn angry. And I'm a therapist, remember. So I said, okay, I'm gonna use this energy. Anger gives you a lot of energy, right? I'm gonna use this energy productively. So I'm gonna write the book I've been wanting to write. So that's how it started. So I wrote it very fast. I don't know how I did. It doesn't happen that way. 150,000 words. So, and I didn't know if it was good or not, but anyway, that's how it started.
That's wonderful. Thank you for being honest.
Thank you.
That's a great question, Bethany. You never know where you're like, ah, damn it, I'm just gonna do it. You know what I mean? Like what life event kind of makes you go. I have one question, if you don't mind. I'm a poet, so I just found it so fascinating when you were talking about characters, and Jay had some great questions about it. And you were like, yeah, too many characters, I had to get rid of one. So I just took some of the traits from one character and put them on another. And that seems like creative, kind of, I think of Frankenstein. You know what I mean? Like melding different parts. And that's a bit of an exaggeration on my part, but how does that work? Like, did you do that? And was it able to, like, when you attached those traits to one of the other characters, did it work? Did it feel natural? You were like, oh, this isn't working.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't take all of it, but some parts it was, there are things. I'm also a painter, and when you paint, you get to like one corner so much, and it's like that with writing. You like certain writing so much, and I have no problem letting go of those things, but I felt like some aspects of another character, by giving it to another character, combining it, I thought it made it I thought I could make it rich, richer.
Okay.
So that's what I did. And then during my critique process, I belong to a few different critique groups, and there are a few people I really respected a lot. And she said, well, it was a war, and so somebody has to die. So I had to come up with, okay, who do I kill without having to change the story a lot. So I ended up I made second sister very attached to her father. I ended up killing her and have her go through depression as a result, killing her father. He was murdered by a communist, a sympathetic person. She, after second sister-in-law learns that, she becomes very depressed and neglects her children, and that's how I read the story.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. Who do I kill off? Jay was kind of beginning the night with that.
Yeah.
You got a very nice comment from Florence Weinberg, who's just sharing some insights about, the insights she experienced reading your novel about Korean culture and the interactions with women. You have someone who would love to be a beta reader for you, Wondra, so that's kind of fun. Does anyone else have any other questions? We have a few more minutes. We'd love to hear from one or two more of you. You are great at talking about your process, Wondra. I know, when I first met you, you were kind of mysterious about your novel. You're like, oh, I'm working on this novel, but I could tell you didn't feel ready to, share it with me. We had just kind of gotten to know each other, but you just explained it a little bit, and I was like, oh, that actually sounds really, really interesting. So it's very fun for me to see it come to fruition and have this journey and be out in the world. Yeah.
Well, when I met you, I actually asked you if you knew anybody who would mentor me too, because I'm always seeking a better writer than I am so that I can learn something from them. And eventually I was able to find critique partners who are better writers than I am. So it worked out. And anything you do, that's why I always encourage people to go to critique groups, attend some classes. There are a lot of free classes online, and belong to Gemini Inc. And I also say, you got to learn to show up to places. I mean, if I didn't show up and try to connect with the other authors, I would have never met my publisher, right? I mean, I try to show up and do things. I always get together. I love people. I love women. So I always get together, that, Alexandra. I just love people, women especially. So I received a lot of support from my friends too, after it was published.
No, and deservedly so. And I think that's a great point, that finding community and
Right.
meeting other authors and writers, like they can become they can be great friends, and it can make the writing experience a little less lonely, which it can be at times. And then you can learn so much from them, and they can be a great support. So I love how you're talking about that. I think this will be good to finish out the night. So Leah has a question for you. How did you know your story was finished?
How it ends?
Yeah, well, how did you know your story was finished? Like, I guess, Leah, you can tell us what you mean by that if you want to, but either like when you were done with the book, like, how did you know when you were done?
Because as a writer, you have a goal of what you want the protagonist to do, right? So when it's done, my question was more of how I ended, because I do not like happy endings. I don't like happy endings. Americans love happy endings. So when I said it's not going to be a happy ending, I got a lot of protests from people and readers saying, she went through so much, she deserves happiness. Come on, please make her happy. Get a happy ending. So I kind of had a happy ending, not Cinderella like happy ending, but kind of quiet happy ending. That's how I chose to do.
Leah, did you want to add anything else to your question?
Well, sometimes you really don't know where to finish, but I think that ending was somewhat satisfying. I would have loved to see her a little bit happier after so much tragedy, and at one point I said, oh my God, this thing is so sad all the time. But then came out the part that she was fending for herself, and I was happy with her for her. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
No, it's a great
Thank you, Leah.
question to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Leah. No, I think you feel like she's really come through a journey by the end. That was my feeling. And
Yeah.
she seems to have found the right life partner, even if it wasn't who she thought it might be. Yeah.
Yeah, what more could she have done? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
yeah. So no
So
secret.
yeah. So everyone, I think it's going to be like drum roll, dot. We can't wait for Wondra to come out with her next novel. And this, Jay, thank you so much for the wonderful questions. Thank you for the wonderful comments. It's always this is one of my favorite parts of my job, just listening to great authors talk about their journeys and experiences. So believe it or not, next month we have the Big Texas Read on July 20th, and it happens to be me.
Hey.
Yeah. Not to plug myself or anything, but just to give you an accurate assessment of what the next author will be in July. So if you're free Wednesday, July 20th, we'd love to have you come. I'm about to confirm my moderator, so we'll be announcing that. But we'll be talking about my latest book of poems called Ricochet Script, published by a wonderful San Antonio publisher of poets called Next Page Press. So I hope you join us. And of course, August, we have the amazing Lorian Guerrero, wonderful poet, Texas Poet Laureate, and we'll be in conversation with her. So thank you so much for joining us. Try to stay cool. And Wondra, it was so great to have you talk about your novel. I never
Thank
ever
you.
get tired of it, and it was just fascinating.
Yeah, thank you for all coming.
Thank you so much, Wondra.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you for
Have a
being
great, have a great evening, everyone, and we will see you next month.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Blake.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.